Get a permanent residence, or I'll run you in for vagrancy.
You can kiss my ass.
Serious? She gets harassed and insulted by this guy, and you throw in a threat to arrest her for vagrancy?
How about if I run you in for obstruction of justice?
I think both of you should get out of here.
Son of a...
That, my friends, is how you, as a person in a dominant group with power, hold other people in dominant groups accountable. That's how you do it. You don't have to use violence. You see systemic bullshit oppression like that, you call that shit out.
Everyone except me is dead because of him, and because I didn't see it coming.
Very conflicting messages in there, right? Garrus says it was my fault, but then he says I was betrayed. So many times in life when people do bad things to us, one of the ways that people try to take control of that unfortunate, uncontrollable situation is to blame themselves. To say that it was because I didn't see it coming. You got to be really careful if you're going to take that kind of mindset on these types of things. Is there some truth to that? Sure, but that's also like self-victim blaming. Beating yourself up for decisions that other people make really isn't in the spirit of health, in my opinion. And too often I see that kind of thing happen with people where they'll blame themselves for things that really you have no business blaming yourself for, especially if it's something that catches you off guard.
I'm General Williams' granddaughter, the only human ever to surrender to an alien race.
Oh. Well, now we get into some family of origin, and now all of a sudden little therapist me is a little intrigued here. If you ask enough questions and show enough curiosity to a person, you will generally find that people are the way they are and do the things they do for what they would consider to be very good reason. We now know a little bit more about where this comes from, and I think it's an important illustration for a lot of things. It's very easy for us to jump down people's throats for the opinions they have, and I do acknowledge that people have harmful opinions and do harm to others. I am not saying, go around and just give everybody the benefit of the doubt. You can hold people accountable to their behavior. Now we understand where this is coming from, but that doesn't change that the way it shows up is generally not great. But if you want to be a person that tries your best to find empathy for people, ask the right questions and show curiosity, you'll get to the core.
This is our home. We've watched the Geth slowly destroy everything that is important to us. Don't judge us too harshly.
Oh, man. Okay, so first of all, that doesn't surprise me at all that everybody here has lost people. That's how cults start. You catch people when they're vulnerable. You catch people when they are looking for purpose. You catch people at their darkest moments. And they take advantage and they create a sense of belonging and they give you a sense of purpose and they feed it to you so you don't have to find it yourself. So that's actually pretty telling that he just admitted that. But this "don't judge us too harshly" is very interesting. That's a tiny little piece of projection. A little piece. This dude knows something's up. He knows that what I just said is partly true, and he's assuming that I'm judging him harshly for it. I'm telling you, man, if you start paying attention to language in people, you can sometimes get some real insight into what's going on for them. Him saying, "don't judge us too harshly," completely unprompted. I've said nothing judgmental other than, man, this is a little bit strange. I'm feeling a little weird here talking to your folks. Says, "don't judge us too harshly." I was just asking a question. Got my eyes on you, Fidan.
It taught things I would need. Walking, talking, hitting, shooting. Then the voice said I was not perfect, and the teaching stopped.
Interesting. Raised, then rejected. Control group? Failed test?
I don't know, but I am not perfect.
Oh my God. This guy keeps saying I'm not perfect. And as a result, I was separated from my caretaker. I was separated from the person or the thing that I perceived as meeting my needs. So he was given an explanation without really understanding the concept of perfect. And I'm gonna tell you right now, if you're a kid, you don't understand the concept of perfect. The only thing that you understand is the way that I am showing up is not facilitating the closeness that I need. My needs are not being met, and I'm being told that it's my fault and that there's something more that I should be doing. But because I'm not old enough to understand what this is, I have no idea what to do in order to meet whatever that is to get my needs met. So it creates this horrible narrative. If you want to translate this to, to humans, this is how people get these very powerful narratives internally of I'm not perfect, and thus I'm going to act in such a way that either is going to show a level of perfection so that I can get what I need from my caregiver, or I'm going to go in the opposite direction and just absolutely live out the lack of perfection and take ownership of it and blaze a warpath. It's not always that black and white, but having this kind of narrative very early on that's that deeply injected into you, I mean, it's deep stuff. This is the stuff that takes years of therapy to get out.
You're supposed to be part of a mercenary army. Do you remember J'adore?
I know that name. It causes anger, but also laughter. I don't know what that means, but I have heard it many times.
Yeah, see, he's just parroting stuff. By the way, this is the embodiment right here in this game of why you do not treat children as adults. This Krogan, despite looking like an adult, does not have the developmental track record to have made sense of the world in order to understand the complexity of all the things that he's saying, in the same way that a child does not have the developmental complexity to understand adult sensibilities. So if you treat children like adults and you place adults' expectations on children, you are going to run into a problem just like this, where kids start doing things and parroting things, not understanding what it actually means, and it causes internal chaos and havoc. This is just all around bad. The developmental psychologist in me hates everything about what this guy is doing.
I always do the smart thing if people fuck with me. That's probably something you should remember.
I have to go, but we should do this again.
Wait. My turn with the questions. People usually walk by now. Why are you really asking all these things? Are you eyeing me up? Because if this is just about sex, maybe you should just fucking say so.
No, wasn't really thinking about that. Jack is probably the most complex character in all of Mass Effect, and there is so much going on in this moment. Obviously, this shows that Jack has had experience where people asking about her and showing some level of interest in her, that there's basically, she's assuming that there's always an ulterior motive to kindness. When we talk about disorganized attachment, which often happens in the aftermath of trauma, particularly when growing up, this is a hallmark of it, because people desire closeness with disorganized attachment. Humans just tend to desire closeness. But that closeness and that reliability of caretaking has been coupled with pain and ulterior motives and agendas, and there's always something else that comes along with it. It's got strings attached or whatever. This is reflective of that. If you're being nice to me, first of all, that's threatening. Second of all, it must mean that you want to bang. There may be, because of Jack being so standoffish, and maybe that sex is a means to have some level of closeness without having to be emotionally close. And yes, sometimes people just want to have sex. But it's interesting because I would much prefer Jack say, I totally want to bang, Shep, you in? As opposed to asking me if this is about sex. Because this conversation isn't about sex. I'm going to say to her, no, I actually genuinely want to get to know you. I will say this. I have to be prepared for the potential consequences of this conversation. Because if I say, no, I want to get to know you, and I show that I'm safe, that very well could end up being appealing, and Jack may very well start becoming somewhat childlike in her way of engaging with me. And I don't mean this as a slight on people with disorganized attachment, but when we look at these things developmentally, this is often what happens. If I start to become reliable and consistent and meet some level of emotional need, there's going to be a level of potential latching that may happen there, and it may start to progressively feel more immature than when she's standoffish, because standoffish is survival. It's adult. Vulnerability, being cared for, probably still very childlike, given the fact that she didn't have a chance to really develop into an adult version of emotional caretaking. When I say that this moment is super loaded, I'm not kidding. There's so much that happened there. We had a level of intimacy, right? Emotional intimacy, just by virtue of me being curious. Me giving just 4 questions was enough to facilitate intimacy with Jack because of how little she has had in her life. Jack brings up sex in that moment, telling me that there is some part of her that likely equates intimacy with sex. But again, intimacy for her is terrifying because of the background she has. So then when I suggest that I don't want to bang now, but I might want to later, Jack then immediately compensates by going to distance by saying sex doesn't have to be about the emotional connection. It's about where you put it, which is a way of distancing from the closeness and vulnerability of sex. And I'm only bringing this up because of the fact that she brought up sex in the context of a level of emotional closeness and curiosity. If we were just like flirting and we were all hot and heavy and shit, that would be different. Maybe the two of us just want to bang and get it out and we're good. But this happened in the context of an emotional conversation. And then you see the way that she tried to put the distance in when I suggested I wasn't interested in it. So she took control of that. And then I took control by saying no. And then she goes, maybe we'll talk later, maybe not, whatever. You see that all the time in Human, which is why I think Jack's a beautifully written character.
There was another reason I went to Cerberus for protection. I have a sister, a twin, and he's still hunting her. Cerberus has kept her safe until now. She's living a normal life on Ilium, safe and hidden from my father.
So you think your father has tracked her down?
Precisely, Commander. My sources indicate he knows that she's on Ilium. I've tried to keep her hidden without impacting her life, but I'm out of options. He's too close. I need to relocate my sister's family before it's too late.
This is very vulnerable of her to ask. And despite the fact that I don't particularly like her in terms of how she's engaged with me and some of the crew and some of the other people in the galaxy to this point, I am also not going to use that to be shitty with her about the fact that she's now coming with vulnerability. By the way, if there are people in your life that are not particularly vulnerable with you, and then they finally at some point are, for example, like a teenage child, you absolutely do not want to respond in that moment with a punishment response. And what I mean by that is the person finally is vulnerable with you and you say something like, about time, or I was wondering when this was going to happen, like some kind of stupid comment like that will immediately punish that person for the fact that they have taken it upon themselves to be vulnerable. So be careful. Even if somebody you don't like comes to you at some point in a moment of vulnerability, take the high road, take that vulnerability in, recognize it for what it is, and don't give a punishment response. Give a reward response, which I'm about to do by asking her more questions.
If your mother fought in the rebellions and your father was a Krogan, didn't that cause tension?
They didn't meet until a few hundred years after the Turians put the boot in with the damn genophage. As far as either one knew, they were both just warriors. Dad boasted. Mom stayed quiet. Mom was a matriarch herself. Dad was near on 1,000 when the truth came out.
What happened when he found out?
I was about 100, shaking my ass in some sleazy bar. They got me on the link. Told me that they were gonna have it out, and made me promise to love whichever one survived. Turned out to be damn easy, since neither one did. Family, huh? What a kick in the quad.
So that's sort of like the extreme Mass Effect Galaxy version of like divorce. Parents do that shit. Like if you're listening to this and you're like, wow, that's a little wild. No. There are plenty of parents that do that. Hi, we're gonna get a divorce. I hate your co-parent, and you're only gonna love one of us. And I'm going to very passively imprint messages on you that pin you against the other person because I now derive my self-worth through who I am as a parent. And I need your affirmation that I'm the right parent and that I'm good. And because I can't separate how bad my marriage was from how I am as a parent, I demand that whoever wins this argument, which will be me because I'm better, because that's why I ended this and that's why we divorced, because I had to deal with that shit, you're gonna love me for that. So here's all the reasons why you're gonna love me, and here's all the expectations I have, and I'm gonna make this your problem because I can't be an adult here and recognize that the person that I just divorced is still your parent. And as a result of this feud, because the other parent did the same thing, we've basically destroyed each other and our relationship with you, and now you are, deciding not to have anything to do with us.
What do you want? Sorry, that damn Krogan's love poems are getting on my nerves.
Is that Krogan bothering you?
No, you don't need to hurt him or anything. He's harmless. Which, I know, Krogan, so it's hard to believe. His name is Char. We're kind of dating, but, well, we're on a break.
It doesn't seem common for Asari to date Krogan. What brought you two together?
He's a fun guy, really smart, especially for a Krogan. Eventually you hit the matron stage, you know? Then you get your back tattoo removed, let your scalp go back to its natural blue, and settle down with someone dependable.
She says that with a little bit of bite. Almost as if she's maybe resentful of the fact that she's getting older and wants to settle down. and this guy's good, but maybe this guy represents a little bit more than just a good relationship. He represents the late stages of her life. Thus, there's a little bit of conflict going on in her mind of like, hey, you know, I really like the idea of settling down with this sensitive Krogan with a stable job, but it's not quite as exciting as my youth, and he's a reminder that I'm getting old, and I don't like that. Like him, don't like getting old. I don't like dissonance, because my Asari brain probably works similarly to a human, so I'm having a struggle with trying to figure out whether I want to keep this going, because if I continue this relationship, it reminds me that I'm getting old. If I end this relationship, maybe there's a chance at some novelty. Just a hypothesis based off of like 2 lines of dialogue.
I see pictures of old battles, voices of warlords, but this is a blood haze in my head. I want control. When we're moving, fighting, I focus. But here, my blood screams, my plates itch, and even you are just noise. I'm tank-born. What is this?
Boy, is that hard to say. It could be instinct. I mean, what we know about Krogan is they tend to be pretty intense. So it very well could be that he's just experiencing a little bit of instinct in the form of aggression. It could also be that there is something that is going on that he's either anxious about or frustrated or whatnot, and the way that Krogan have learned to handle that is through aggression, and because he still doesn't really have a sense of self to connect whatever that anxiety is to, like he's not experiencing that anxiety relative to something. Like a lot of times we'll experience distress relative to like our value set or what our sensibilities are based on expectations we have. And so then you have that experience that doesn't align with that, and it makes you anxious, but you can at least pinpoint it and go like, this doesn't feel right because X. Grunt doesn't have that luxury. He doesn't have the luxury of a sense of self. He was imprinted by somebody else. Maybe he's experiencing Okir's anxiety. Maybe he's experiencing his own. We have no way of knowing, but what he knows is a very primal, show the stress through aggression, because I don't have a sophisticated way of making sense of that, because I simply haven't been around long enough to learn how to do that.
Most off-world Krogan are warriors. Doctors don't leave the homeworld to Junka. I won't ask you to go there. I will control this.
Joker can get us to the Krogan homeworld. I need everyone at their best.
Thank you, Shepard. I don't like this. Fury is my choice, not a sickness.
Yeah, he wants complete control over his emotions. And I'm here to tell you, friends, this is a beautiful example of the fact that you don't get to control your emotional experience. Something is happening for Grunt where he is having an emotional reaction to something that his brain's interpreting from the environment, and he is falsely thinking that he somehow can control that, even going so far as to conceptualize emotion as something that is only in his control. No. What he's really experiencing is just what it's like to have an emotional experience and to not know how to make sense of it, which is why I always talk about why creating a narrative and choosing your behaviors amidst the emotion is so important. Grunt didn't bash his head against the glass because the emotion made him do it. Grunt chose to bash his head against the glass. But if he's attributing it to something that he doesn't understand, or to a lack of sense of control, he's right. He doesn't have control over his emotional experience. And he doesn't have the developmental understanding to be able to create meaning that's going to help interpret that emotional experience in a way that's going to lead to behaviors that actually either mitigate that emotional experience or are more effective for him. Hence why he bashes his head on glass, because he doesn't have the middle connection part.
No. You always had a plan. Masked life signs or an onboard medical stasis program, maybe. You wouldn't. They're wrong. You wouldn't just die like this. You wouldn't leave me to... Damn it. I'm sorry.
You've got nothing to be sorry about.
Maybe he would have known I'd come. Maybe he left a message.
The main hub will be on the bridge. You'll need to destroy it to stop their VI processes from forming new neural links. Make sure Hangerl and Darozen see the data. They must.
Thanks, Dad.
He knew you'd come for him. He was trying to help you. It's not perfect. It's not what you wanted. But it's the best he could do.
I don't know what's worse. Thinking he never really cared, or thinking that he did, and that this was the only way he could show it. It doesn't matter. One way or the other, I cared. And I'm here. And we're ending this.
All right. You want to talk about a really fabulous way? I mean, not that I'm here to talk about what's the best way to grieve, but I tell you what, Tali making that cognitive shift that quickly with her dead father on the floor to say, you know what? Whatever the unknown reason is that my father died, whatever his convictions were, whatever is now left to me to make meaning out of, at this point, I'm going to focus on what it means for me. I'm here. I know what I'm doing. I know what my intentions were. I've got a job to do. I'm going to get through this, and then I'll figure out and process what this means for how I'm going to make sense out of my father's death and my father's life, even once we're out of here. But man, being able to look at that and say, he's dead, and regardless of what his intentions were, I'm going to be disappointed. She's holding a realistic view of her father and his death, and that's not easy to do. But for her to make that shift and say, I'm going to focus on what my convictions were, I know what my values are. Like, I know I was in the right in what I was doing. I give her a lot of credit for it instead of blaming herself. Right? She's holding her father accountable for what he did.
Every clan has different customs, rites of passage, rules of behavior, battle songs, all unique. That diversity makes us great. No clan, not even mine, was meant to survive on its own.
Diversity is great. Look at Wrex being a bastion of progressive ideology. I want diversity, strength and diversity. Appreciate our differences and come together. I like it. I like Wrex.
Too far, Wrex. Your clan may rule, but this thing is not Krogan.
Idiot. So, Grunt, do you wish to stand?
Idiot. I have never understood, really in any capacity, why people get on other people for the way in which they came to be. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Who gives a shit where he's come from? What we should give a shit about is where he's going. And Grunt is very clearly invested in trying to somehow become part of Krogan. Or Krogan Hood. Like, who cares whether he was bred in a tank or not? If he is trying to figure himself out and wants to go in the direction that we're all collectively trying to go, why on earth would we block him from doing that just because of where he came from? He didn't have a choice in that matter. I just always find that to be ridiculous. You want to talk about reprocessing trauma? So here's the thing. I know this is a little bit idealistic because we're actually walking into the place where the trauma happened. You know, as a therapist who occasionally works with trauma, this is a really huge moment here. She is going to walk into this room and her brain is very likely going to light up in the way that it did when she was a kid. And she is going to get sucked into all of the automatic thoughts, all of the vigilance, all the everything that goes on. Now, she's an adult now, so she has a little bit of a capacity to cognitively override this. But when we talk about reprocessing in trauma work, one of the things that we're talking about is that in tandem with emotional desensitization. It doesn't mean that you're not acknowledging your emotion, but it means that when we walk in this room, we are going to be prepared for what the emotional intensity of walking into that room is going to be. And then we are going to use that as an opportunity to engage our adult brain to reprocess that space in a way that is more empowering to you, and it is a way that does not perpetuate the trauma and the effect that it has on your psyche and on the way in which you process the world around you. It's a very delicate situation. You would never do this right away. You would build up to it. But Jack is about to have that moment. And if you're a therapist in this type of situation, you are prepared for, and you have hopefully done your assessment on what the person's orientation to the trauma is in terms of what's likely to happen, whether it's dissociation, aggression, etc., so that we can intercept that and we can use the tools that we've built up until this point where we re-engaged it. That's why you do not go in and immediately dig in and try to uncover unprocessed memories and shit like that, because the client, in this case Jack, is not ready for that.
Come out. We know you're here.
Who are you?
My name is Aresh, and you're breaking into my home. I know you, Subject Zero. So many years have passed, and I thought I was the only survivor.
My name is Jack. How the hell do you know me?
We all knew your face, Jack. They inflicted horrors on us so their experiments wouldn't kill you. You were the question, and I'm still looking for the answer.
So remember what I said about how this is going against her narrative, if we acknowledge that this guy might be like her, this is going to be dicey, but we're going to give it a shot. We're going to engage with Jack so that she stays present here as opposed to getting wrapped up in the emotion of this moment.
Looks like you're not the only one pulled back here, Jack.
I tried to forget this, but a place like this, it doesn't forget you. It follows you. I hired these mercs and came back almost a solar year ago. We're rebuilding it piece by piece. I'm gonna find out what they knew, how to unlock true biotic potential in humans. I'm restarting the Telton facility. It will be beautiful.
I wanted a hole in the ground. He's trying to justify what happened by using it?
You do the same thing to new kids? Wasn't this forced on you?
Some were bought from poor families on Earth or kidnapped from colonies. Most ended up here the way I did. Batarian pirates. They did such horrible things to us. They must have had good reasons.
There's no reason good enough. Are you nuts? You lived it.
Oh. So this guy experienced the same trauma. The way that he made sense of this trauma is to say that his captors must have had good reason for doing it. This is the complexity of trauma, friends. People can experience the same traumatic events and process it entirely different. This happened to me. I had no control. The only control I have is the narrative that I create. And if I'm going to create a meaningful narrative, maybe, just maybe, the people that are doing this to me have reason to do it, and I'm part of a bigger purpose. And this is the way that I can make sense of this in a way that allows me to survive. We look at this as survival. I don't know that we would look at this as Stockholm Syndrome, because Stockholm Syndrome would suggest that this person sort of like aligns with and, you know, falls in love with, but like enthralled with their captors in a certain way. This is making sense of the moment in a way that's going to work for him and help him survive. But yeah, that's the thing, right? Like there's a diversity to the way that people process trauma. Not all things are traumatic for people. And now we're seeing a difference here.
We can blow up the place, but that still leaves him. What do we do with another you?
That's easy.
Just leave me here. This is where I belong.
Fuck that.
Jack, he's trapped in his past. You need to move on from yours.
He wants to restart this place. He needs to die.
He's crazy, and he's never gonna restart this facility. You have to let it go. Your past doesn't have to control you.
Fuck. Get out of here. Go.
That's the reprocessing.
He's not worth chasing. None of it is.
That right there is how you reprocess in that moment. She's taking it. She's going to kill that guy. She's going, whoop, the emotion of it. No, Jack, take control. You get to control how you navigate this space. It does not have to control you. Use what you have learned to make that decision. And she did it. And as a result, we are going to reinforce the shit out of that and make sure that she feels held and comfortable and acknowledged and reinforced for the decision that she just made, because she just acted on a way of reprocessing a traumatic space that she was in for a very long time. That is huge. Is monumentally huge.
I thought that room out there was the rest of the world. I'd pound and yell. Never did any good.
All right, so now what we're doing is we're taking control and reprocessing the space. If I was like a therapist in this space, I'd say, okay, so what do you make of that now, Jack? So as a kid, you looked at this as a view to the outside world. What do you see this as now? What does this mean for you? How are you feeling? We'd be constantly checking in with her as we're doing this. What's it like to look out of this glass like this? Tell me what the automatic thoughts are, and tell me what it is that you actually want to make meaning out of in this space.
Sometimes I dream that I'm back in this bed being tortured. I used to tie the sheets around my wrists and try to rip them off. I want to stop coming back here.
So the way that we stop coming back here is to reprocess the mental image and space that she has in her mind, right? Her coming back here physically to reprocess it is super important, because it also affects the way she's going to carry it with her in her mind, so that it has less control over her. She controls the narrative. It does not control her. Trauma has a way of making people feel like they're being controlled by whatever trauma has thrust upon them. We want to help people regain a sense of empowerment and control of what it is that happened to them, because trauma's not fair.
End of the line, Morinth.
And they call me a monster. Find peace in the embrace of the goddess.
ready to leave this place and get on with my life. Are you ready to go as well?
This really speaks to the power of Samara's binding to her oaths. She just killed her daughter because she was a danger, and because of Samara's principles, and because she wanted to protect the greater good. That is some incredible mindfulness. That is taking context and patterns and everything else into account to say, you know what, I'm going to hold you accountable as an adult to what you are, and even though I'm your parent and that's a connection we'll always have, I can't let you continue. I can't continue this relationship. That is a hell of a decision to make. One of the things with grief is that there's like reactive grief and then there's preemptive grief. Samara has spent the last 400 years chasing Morinth down, all with the objective of killing her. Morinth has had all of that time without seeing Morinth to process this moment, to know that the moment would come, that it would be difficult, and that she would make the decision that she needed to make. And because of that processing, it probably makes the grief of this, it doesn't take the grief down, but it probably takes the emotional intensity of it down, because it's almost like a sigh of relief. And this translates in a lot of ways to how people, if people are realistic about the grieving process, particularly if, you know, something's going on with like a loved one, whether they're in like long-term care or whether they're, you know, like slowly dying off or whatever it may be, that if you can process that grief as it's happening, maybe even talk to the person that you're grieving throughout that process, it can make the actual moment when this happens something that you're impacted by, but also able to be a lot more present with, as opposed to all up in your emotions that sort of suck you out of the moment. And I really think there's some merit to that. So there's no doubt that the reason Morinth was able to make that decision, was able to pull the plug, if you will, and is processing it right now in the way that she is by saying, you know what, I'm good for now, is probably because she's had all that time to process it.
I remember right before one mission, we were about to hit a Batarian pirate squad. Very risky. This recon scout and I had been at each other's throats. Nerves, mostly. She suggested we settle it in the ring.
Oh, yeah? How'd that go?
I assume you took her down gently?
Actually, she and I were the top-ranked hand-to-hand specialists on the ship. I had reach, but she had flexibility. It was brutal. After 9 rounds, the judge called it a draw. There were a lot of unhappy bettors in the training room. We ended up holding a tiebreaker in her quarters. I had reach, but she had flexibility. More than one way to work off stress, I guess.
Fun fact, you want to know why angry/makeup sex is so nice? There's a biological explanation for it. If you get into an argument and you're, in conflict and you perceive it to be, beyond like what you're normally expecting, your sympathetic nervous system fires. When your sympathetic nervous system goes off, you lose a lot of functions. Like you don't, like, hunger is suppressed. Also, your like sexualness is suppressed. So like different hormones and your nervous system and stuff, like your genitals, just you're not in the mood to have sex when your sympathetic nervous system is firing. But you do get aroused in that moment physiologically, so you've got blood that starts throwing through your body, your pupils dilate, all these fun things, right, while your system's activated. When your parasympathetic nervous system gets engaged after you've worked your way through a fight, it starts to bring things back online, but it doesn't flush all the hormones out. And there's all that physiological arousal, plus you throw in now sexual arousal because of that system coming back, and sex becomes really great. So there are many other factors that play into that, but that is one of the reasons why makeup sex can be so awesome.
Still hard to believe Malin betrayed me, betrayed my work, disgusted by his actions. Proud of his nerve, though. Almost thought he lacked backbone. Shame I had to kill him. Might have made a good member of the team, willing to get his hands dirty.
You're really at peace with what happened?
Yes, of course. Can't change what happened. Life continues. Back to mission, back to work. Become like Malin otherwise. Solarian emotional processing faster than other species. Has to be. Short-lived culture can't spend time reminiscing.
So you really don't feel bad at all about what happened on Tuchanka?
Yes, correct. Now at least. Greatly distressed at the time. Stages of grief, loss, anger, rationalization. Dealt with it.
Most issues settled on Tuchanka, some on shuttle back to Normandy.
I don't particularly enjoy the way that Shepard engages with Mordin in these dialogue options. It's pretty clear that BioWare wants you to dislike Mordin for what he chose to do. It comes out in Shepard's responses to him of basically like leading in a direction where, how could you? There's so many how could you type questions that Shepard asks him. It really bugs me that that's the case, because I want to learn more about what's going on for Mordin without challenging what it is that he's saying. I would so much rather Shepard take a more curious stance about it, whether he agrees with what he's doing or not. Again, you don't have to agree or disagree with people in order to be curious about where it is that they're coming from. And I just don't like the bite in Shepard's voice, because it doesn't really portray curiosity. It really more comes from a place of judgment and asking him to justify what it is that he's saying. Be careful with the way that you ask questions of the people around you, because if you lace your questions with judgments, you're really making statements instead of questions, and people will pick up on that pretty quick.
Jacob, you were a better man dead. As far as I'm concerned, you still are. Jacob!
Way to control your narrative, Jacob. Way to control your narrative. That is holding your parent accountable in adulthood. That is looking at the decisions your parent has made and said, you know what? Don't respect it. And as far as I'm concerned, you're dead to me. And that is honestly one of the best ways to cognitively sever yourself from somebody if you decide you're going to cut them off, is you imagine they're dead. Because if Jacob continues to engage with him, if he continues to reach out, that's not actually a cutoff. Cutoff is cutoff. You have to imagine that that person has died. You do not engage with them any further. And Jacob is on the road toward that by the way that he just handled that. Holy shit.
Laser dot trembles on the skull. One finger twitch. He dies. Then a smell of spice on the spring wind. Sunset-colored eyes defiant in the scope. The laser dances away. My apologies. Drell slip into memory so easily.
Was that one of your assassinations?
Yes. Perhaps we can discuss it later. I've wasted too much of your time.
Friends, please get that out of your vernacular. If you're a person that, like Thane, tends to just automatically believe that you're wasting people's time when you engage with them and you say things like that, you don't do yourselves any favor interactionally. I'm the one that decides whether Thane is wasting my time. Me. Thane might feel like what he's saying is a waste of time. He might be telling himself it's a waste of time. But projecting that over to me puts me in an unenviable position of having to now defend the fact that I don't find him to be uninteresting. In fact, I'd love to continue talking to him. And maybe he wants to continue talking. So there's two possible options here. Either he wants to continue talking and he sees it as burdensome, and so he projects it onto me that's burdensome, and then he stops it from happening, which then doesn't really have any good end, and then he gets to see himself as burdensome because nobody's asking him questions because he's preemptively cut it off. Or Thane actually wants to end the conversation and doesn't want to talk about it, in which case, take ownership of it. Say, I don't want to continue this conversation, instead of throwing it out as he's doing me some sort of favor because he's wasting my time. Take ownership of your decisions interactionally and move to a place where you stop assuming that your time and your presence is burdensome to others unless they tell you that it is.
Well, then maybe you'd like to tell us where to find him.
Yes, of course. He's in the factory district. Works out of the old prefab foundry.
I know the place.
Little quick tip here, because Garrus just did something that was very important. Many of you who are parents may know what I'm about to say. One of the most respectful things that you could ever do for a child, I mean, in this case, we're talking about a Volus here, it's a little different, but for a child, is to get down on their level when you talk to them. And now that could be very offensive to an adult, so I'm not suggesting you do this to an adult, but I'm saying for a child, get down on their level, and you meet them at their level, you become a lot less scary to them. Because if you think of yourself from their perspective as a big adult who's towering over them, that's scary. You get down on their level, you connect with them, you're more likely to establish a connection with them. Garrus took a shot at that with the Volus and did that, and in this case, it looks more like a sign of respect and a sign of connection. And look at the information that he's able to get out of the Volus by doing that. I think it's more of a metaphor for the fact that, like, one of the best ways to engage with people is to get on their level, sometimes physically, but more often like thinking about emotionally where they're at, sort of validating that, even if it's internally, like acknowledging what's going on for that person.
David, Please pay attention. Loud. It's getting loud in here. I'm sorry, you didn't deserve that. Would you mind repeating my notes from Thursday's experiment?
Log 137.3. The experiment yielded no discernible patterns of geth obedience. End dictation now, David. Hell, the elusive man will have my head for this.
Thank you. And how are you feeling today?
Square root of 924.16 is 30.4. Earplugs would be good.
There's sort of a dual thing going on here in terms of representation that I think is important to acknowledge. One is that, is it maybe a bit cliche to suggest that a person with autism is robotic in the way that they're thinking about it and would have an affinity toward numbers? Yes. At the same time, the depiction of David here, I don't think is entirely unrealistic. Like, you could ostensibly see this. And if David is particularly great with mathematics, if that's something that he is relatively fixated on, and his brain works in that way, and he's repeating some of these things that seem to not make much sense to us, but have like kind of repeated pattern for him, almost as if it sounds like a tick, that's something that sometimes you'll see, particularly with people with severe autism. Sometimes they'll mutter things under their breath, or will have certain like fixations and obsessions that go beyond what maybe like we would expect from somebody who's neurotypical, who has maybe a diverse range of things that they're paying attention to. So David presenting in the way that he's presenting here, I don't think is entirely unrealistic, despite the fact that, you know, again, if we look at it as like, oh wow, really, we're going to do the robot thing, there's an argument to be made there, but I think we lose out on the ability to discuss this in some significant depth here if we go in that direction. One of the ways that sometimes we think about the mind of a person who has relatively severe autism, even minor autism, is that there's sort of an order of operations at times, particularly to social interaction. And that mechanical way of viewing interaction is sometimes the best way to engage with a person with particularly severe autism, because it becomes a series of inputs and outputs as opposed to social nuance that many people who are neurotypical might take for granted. When we say like, oh, you know, a person with autism is very robotic, in a lot of ways that is in cases how a person with autism can present. It depends on the skew of whether you're going to say that in a demeaning way, or if you're going to say it in the sense of like, okay, so I can engage with this person maybe more effectively if I take into account a conversation as a series of inputs and outputs behaviorally that needs to be interpreted in a very like binary literal way, as opposed to with an excessive amount of nuance where a person has to read into what I'm saying beyond what I'm actually saying.
If the Reapers invade, we need the galaxy to work together. If we're at war with the Batarians, the other races will be hesitant to give aid to either side.
Is the Alliance prepared for a Reaper invasion?
That's hard to say. It took multiple fleets and the Destiny Ascension to bring Sovereign down, and that was just one Reaper. If the Reapers come in force, we're just not ready.
I will make a bit of a point here. This is how paranoia can develop sometimes, or at the very least be exacerbated. I know a thing to be true. And, you know, if we talk about something like psychosis and a person's hearing voices or hallucinating, whatever, for that person, it's true. And to the outer world here, to the galaxy, I probably look like I have some form of psychosis, right? Like I am believing and I am making gigantic behavioral decisions based on what appears to the rest of the galaxy to be a hunch. And if you're Shepard here, you basically have two options. Do you start to question your own judgments? Do you start to question your own eyes and ears? Do you question the things that you have literally been a part of, like this mission that we just did? Because the wider galactic community is telling you you're nuts? Or do you hold on to your truth at the risk of appearing to be absolutely paranoid and out of touch? It is an impossible situation for a person to be. And if you talk to people with severe psychosis, they will tell you a lot of times that's what it feels like. Not only are you struggling with your own brain, you're struggling with the difference in reality of so many people around you that consistently tell you you're nuts. When you're a person that's experiencing like hallucinations and stuff, it is very real to you. So we know that Shepard is legit here, right? But this is how people get into psychological binds. And it's terrifying to be in this situation. We can't win. That's a really heavy one. That mission is something else. You know, experimentation at what cost here? This is the importance of when you're a person who is, you know, conducting experiments to try to figure things out for the greater good. You had damn well better get to the ground level and see what's going on. Now, the elusive man, I don't necessarily trust him, but man, David's just sort of like parroting what he's heard from Archer, right? It all seems so helpless, yet he's obviously in excruciating pain, wants it to stop. My guess is that what happened is, you know, we think this mission pitches this as how David gets interfaced with the Geth and how he influences the Geth, but it doesn't spend as much time talking about how being interfaced with the Geth is bidirectional and how David might be influenced by being synthesized with the Geth. So I think when David is saying, make it stop, even beyond the pain, my guess is that David is hearing all of the binary from the collective consciousness of the Geth in his mind. And because he's not a computer, he doesn't have the ability to synthesize ones and zeros like that. He's hearing it as a probably utterly debilitating noise in his head that he can't make stop. And that is literal torture. It is literal torture. It's about the worst thing you could possibly do. I mean, beyond even the physical torture and stuff. You want to talk about mental torture? Overloading him that way, not thinking about the fact that this is bidirectional, I think is the greatest failure on Archer's part, beyond the fact that he, you know, put his brother in this position in the first place. You have to think about these things systemically. Synthesis is not one direction. Synthesis is bidirectional. David communicates with Geth. Geth communicate with David. The human brain can process very quickly. But at this point, those machines are processing as a collective unconscious so fast, there's no way David's going to be able to interface with that. All it's going to start to hear is noise. And David probably doesn't have the ability, this is by no fault of his own, to communicate that clearly to Archer. And I don't even think it would matter, because Archer would manipulate him into continuing the experiments for some bigger belief of some greater cause that he's influencing without even knowing if it's possible to do that or that it's going to work. Horrible shit, man. I hate everything about what Archer and the elusive man do on this.
You're making a habit of costing me more than time and money.
This is what you get when you bring me back as I am, bucko. If you wanted me to bring me back in a certain way so that I'd do whatever you wanted to do, you probably should have imprinted me or changed me. But you yourself said, I want you back as you are, which means you have to live with the consequences of who I am. Bitch.
You get the help you deserve.
And what about the rest of humanity? Your ideals have cost us more than you can imagine. The technology from that base could have secured human dominance in the galaxy against the Reapers and beyond.
Human dominance? Or just Cerberus?
Strength for Cerberus is strength for every human. Cerberus is humanity. I should have known you'd choke on the hard decisions. Too idealistic from the start.
I'm not looking for your approval. Harbinger is coming, and he won't be alone. Humanity needs a leader who's looking out for them. From now on, I'm doing things my way, whether you agree or not.
Don't turn your back on me, Shepard. I made you. I brought you back from the dead.
I don't owe you for that. I didn't ask for it. You did it on your own volition. You don't get to hold that over my head. If you wanted to do this, why don't you take your ass and get on another Normandy and build your own crew and send your ass through the Omega-4 relay, and you save the collector base. But if you're gonna send me to do it, you're gonna live with my decision.
Joker, lose this channel.
It is difficult to express. Your brain exists as chemistry, electricity. Like AIs, you are shaped by both hardware and software. We are purely software, mathematics. The heretic's conclusion is valid for them. Our conclusion is valid for us. Neither result is an error. An analogy. Heretics say 1 is less than 2. Geth say 2 is less than 3.
What a beautiful, wonderful metaphor for difference of opinion and the incredible power that a difference of opinion can have, no matter where it comes from, right? Like that if people, or if machines in this case, are fully solidified in a conclusion, and that conclusion is logically brought to, similar to how I discuss on stream all the time, that if you ask enough questions and you get in there enough with curiosity, you can usually find that there's a decision tree behind all the decisions that people make, and they make them for a reason. This is really a metaphor for that you have two different synthetic beings that have different paths to different conclusions, that are somewhat similar but also clash, and that maybe it's an impasse, maybe there's a bridge to be made there. Our decision trees are powerful. It's not always about the end result. It's about how you weave a fabric that gets people to an end result. And if you take people only at the end result, you're gonna miss the mark, right? Legion has identified that a single rounding error or a difference in number in the path toward a conclusion is the thing that ultimately leads to a different conclusion. And if we can understand that and go in there and intercept that and understand that better, perhaps we can reverse it around and bring it to a different conclusion, perhaps a conclusion that maybe is for the betterment of the galaxy in this case. Really, really, really powerful stuff. And this happens in human interaction all the time.
We wouldn't be here if the heretics wanted to be friends with the Geth. Why wouldn't they spy on you?
You do not understand. Organics do not know each other's minds. Geth do. We are not suspicious. We accept each other. The heretics desired to leave. We understood their reasons. We allowed it. There was peace between us.
It couldn't have lasted forever. You disagreed about what path your race should take.
Human history is a litany of blood shed over differing ideals of rulership and afterlife. Geth have no such history. We shared consensus on such things. How could we have become so different? Why can we no longer understand each other? What did we do wrong?
What a fascinating idea. That because humans can't read each other's minds, we approach each other with a form of skepticism. Or at the very least, some small amount of anxiety. Because we can't know what another person is thinking. In fact, really, the only way that we ever know what people are thinking is through language, because they share it with us. And even then, we don't necessarily know if the language aligns with the person's actual convictions. Behavioral manifestations in language are about the only ways we can ever really get any sort of insight into a person. Geth, on the other hand, can reach consensus automatically because they are already in the collective mindset that humans don't have the ability to do. And so now Legion are experiencing dissonance because they don't see dissonance and individual perspective or lack of consensus as something that they will experience. So their violation of expectation is entirely different than what ours would be, which is really fascinating stuff.
Whether or not you agree with Miranda, Oriana has been with her family for years now.
Her father can still give her a better life.
You don't know what my father wants for her.
You don't either.
I know that I've been poor, Mary. I didn't much care for it.
He wants to take a girl away from the only family she's ever known. Doesn't that tell you what he really is?
No, that's confirmation bias for you. That's confirmation bias for you. This is why family therapy exists. This is why we get everybody in the room, because we're sitting here talking about a bunch of shit that we don't have the ability to talk directly to the people who have their actual agendas and convictions on. We are making so many assumptions. This whole conversation is fucking nonsense, because Miranda thinks one thing about her father, and that colors every single action that she sees him take. Niket sees her father in an entirely different light, so that colors every decision he sees the father and Miranda make. All we have here are the perceptions and projections of everybody here. So we are staying out of it until we have the people in here that actually can tell us what the hell is going on. This is a very precarious situation for us to be in as a leader, because I gotta make calls on some shit that I am not comfortable making calls on because I don't have the information that I need in order to make it.
Why didn't you let me kill him? I could have handled that. But watching him get gunned down by that Asari bitch.
I know it hurts that he's gone, but at least you don't have his death on your conscience.
No. I blame my father for that. Even now he's finding ways to screw with my life. It's always been like this. My father gave me anything I ever wanted, but there was always a hook, an angle for his long-term plan. I threw away everything he ever gave me when I ran. Except Niket. Weakness on my part?
She is still carrying the expectation of perfection that her father had for her growing up. And it's coming out in the way that she is conceptualized this. So she desperately doesn't want to be perfect. She desperately wants to have her sister live a normal life. She doesn't want perfection to be part of the way that she conceptualizes who she is. Yet, when you have a thing that happens, the narrative that she constructs is one that is founded upon an idea of perfection. It was weakness for me to leave Niket as a loose end, even though she couldn't have possibly known that this was going to happen. She might have been able to anticipate it, but the way she was acting at the time, she was thinking she was doing what she believed was in the best interest of her sister, who at a time probably couldn't consent either way. So if you don't want to have a perfection narrative here, Miranda, you've got to be willing to accept that that was not weakness, that that's what happens. That's what normal, non-perfect people do, is they make mistakes and they learn from them and they do their best at a given point in time. And that's what you do. You kept your sister, and that, I would imagine, has got to be enough.
You still have Oriana.
My father didn't give her to me. I rescued her, but yes, you're right. I still have something. Thank you.
Like a well-traveled Krogan, Ambassador.
I am.
Then you must know who I am. And you have to be aware that bad things happen to those who oppose me.
Stand down, men. I'm starting to like this human. I am the ambassador to Urdnok from Clan Nakmor. We're a small clan based in the Cryptic Wastes.
You want to talk about reading the room? When you are engaging with certain individual people, I mean, in this case, we're engaging with Krogan, but when you get to know people, you start to learn some of the ways that you can get engagement from them. Krogan, in this case, very clearly respond and respect aggression. They respect when you are to the point, when you stand strong, when you are in their face and unapologetic about it. They come at you with intensity, and if you come back at them with intensity, they will respect it and actually end up backing down or inviting you in as a result of that. And I really think there's a lesson to be had there. Like Shepard reads the room here. You know, if you have friends, some of which respond to tough love, others that respond to softness and empathy, use what you know about how other people respond to become invited into their space and into whatever it is that they are capable of providing. If you go around just kind of like ham-fisting your way through stuff in a way that you would want to be responded to, you are going to find that it's going to be hard to get on board with lots of people or diverse groups of people. If you really pay attention to and listen to what other people and groups of people need from a given circumstance or conversation, you are far more likely to be able to engage in more efficient and effective ways with people because you've read the room and you've listened and you've observed. So Shepard being able to have access to this ambassador because he was willing to stand his ground and talk about the fact that he has done a lot of shit and that they really should be afraid of him, gained the respect of the Krogan, and thus he is now willing to have a conversation with us.
When a memory feels as real as life, it's as valid as life. Thinking about a moment brings back the smell of cut grass, the warmth of another's hand on yours, the taste of another's tongue in your mouth. Wouldn't you rather lose yourself in such a memory than spend the night alone, staring at walls of metal and plastic?
Isn't there a risk that you could lose yourself in bad memories as well?
Of course. Remembering the times I've taken bullets is unpleasant. But I can look at my knee and see it's not shattered. The memories that are hard to escape are those of despair.
Now you may be saying to yourself, wow, what a very Drell thing. Oh, no, my friends. We do this too. Though it may not be perfect, we humans are just as guilty of doing this. We spend a lot of time thinking about the past. Many of us, rather than going back and thinking about the past as it happened, will often go back into the past with judgment. We'll go back in and ask ourselves how it could have been different, what we might have done instead of what happened. Certainly there are memories that we will relive, but there are many, many, many of us, all of us, that will go into the past and live there as a way to escape the present. And if you use the past as avoidance behavior of the anxiety of the present, you are creating a pretty nasty loop for yourself. So Thane here, in terms of talking about it as him actually being able to go back and relive it, it's a real lesson to all of us that, like, you do have to build a level of distress tolerance for the present and keep yourself focused in the present. You can use the past to inform it. It's certainly okay to think about good memories that you've had and to reflect. But living in the past as a form of escapism, oh, does that create lots of problems. I've seen a lot of comments in TikTok of people telling me what happens in Mass Effect 3. And we can't use hindsight to contextualize that conversation because in that moment, I didn't have the benefit of hindsight to know anything about Miranda's father. Should I believe Miranda? I certainly can. and did. But the illustration of confirmation bias is still true. We are all susceptible to confirmation bias. When we have a certain structure or schema of a person or series of events, that is going to bias us into the things that we pay attention to and blind us to things that we might otherwise pay attention to if we had an expanded expectation or schema for what's going on. I know that Miranda is right to do what she's doing, but in that moment, as the person who has to make the call as Shepard, I can only take into account the information I have at that moment. If you use hindsight to criticize decisions that people make with as much data as they had in the moment to make that decision, it's a non-starter, because you don't look smarter by saying that. You're just using the benefit of hindsight, which is something that people don't have in the moment-to-moment actions, which is why using hindsight to criticize yourself, knowing that 10 times out of 10 you'd go back and make the same decision, isn't very great. Confirmation bias exists. It doesn't mean that you're going to deny somebody who's saying that, another person is abusive or something like that. What it actually means is that that person is biased in the way that they're going to view new information that is presented, like it was in that clip. And if you're in a position as like a therapist or as a leader in that moment, it's on you to make sure that you and the other people around are aware of that confirmation bias and how they are perceiving new information that comes about, because everybody's got their blinders. And as a therapist, we are working to try to make sure that we can get as close to an objective reality as possible, which is why having more people in the room, including Miranda's father in that case, is important, because then we can get as many perspectives as possible. So using hindsight is not helpful. I know that Miranda's father sucks, but in that moment, I can only make a decision with the information I have, not the information I'm going to have.
Sorry about the crew, and you know what? I'm not sorry. What the hell were you doing leaving us out here where collectors can work us over? Because you know what? I should just go. Next port, just get the hell out of here.
You don't mean that, Jeff.
No, but it felt good. I'm sorry, Commander. Okay, I'm ready. I'm good. I'm ready to save the day.
I respect that a lot, because he's right. He's not to blame for this. Neither am I. Nobody's to blame for this, but humans like to assign blame to things. It makes it easier for us to tell the story. Ambiguous loss is one of the most difficult things humans can experience. When we don't have a direct and linear story for how to conceptualize a thing that happens, it creates a lot of dissonance, and our brain hates that. And one of the ways that we do that is by assigning blame. I think it's very important in this instance, as Joker seems to be willing to do, is to say, you know what? Maybe there's a part of me that's at fault. Maybe there's a part of you that's at fault. Maybe it's more proportionately in your direction, but there's really nothing any of us could have done, because we're victims of circumstance, and we have to accept the consequences of that. And assigning blame, maybe not a great idea. Maybe we chalk it up to circumstance, and that gets to be our story. And ultimately, yes, it's the fault of the collectors. The collectors are the ones that came in and killed us. We don't have to worry about that if the collectors don't do that. So if we assign blame to them, that may be the best place to do it. So I respect that he's willing to come at me. I think a good leader hears that.
Shepard, I don't know what you are, or who. Not since Cerberus rebuilt you.
Fair.
For all I know, you could be their puppet, controlled by the elusive man himself.
Mm-hmm.
That's not fair, kid.
Yes, it is.
Don't try to explain it. I don't think I'd understand anyway. I just want to know, is the person that I followed to hell and back still in there?
Yes.
Somewhere.
Shepard that he knows would empathize here, right? The Shepard that he knows would say, I understand where you're coming from. I've had some hard decisions to make, and I made them. That brings me back into his mind's eye in an ideal way, right? The lesson to be had here, chat, is that if you have done something and you think about it from another person's perspective, that what you know of what they know of the thing you did is that it would be harmful to them, engage your empathic core. You get so much farther in reuniting with people and repairing tears that you have in your alliance and your relationship with people when you dig deep and you pay attention to what it is that where they're coming from. You be curious about the things that they're asking and saying to you, and you listen to them and you empathize. You can still state clearly where you were coming from. You can still say, here's what happened, here's what was going on in my mind, but I understand your hesitation. I understand why that was hurtful. I understand why you might be having a hard time giving me a second chance. That makes complete sense. If you get defensive in moments like these, all you're further doing is just digging your heels in and creating a chasm. You're not uniting in that. So Caden is attempting to bridge a gap. He's attempting to get information because he wants to connect with me again. If I get defensive in that moment, I am punishing him for trying to reestablish the link. as opposed to creating that bridge and meeting him there. We have to meet him halfway. We know what we know, but he doesn't have all the information that we have. We have to remember that.
Doctor, I'll get you a report as soon as...
I guess we know how Cerberus got in.
I should have realized it when I met her. I was just so focused on finding a way to stop the Reapers.
Not your fault. This is yet another instance, chat, of a person blaming themselves for the action of somebody else. Liara, this isn't on you. That Dr. Eva chick is who decided to kill those guys. This is not on you. You did not hold her hand against that gun and pull the trigger. Too many instances of people taking the blame for shit they don't need to take the blame for, man. Like, you are not accountable for that, Liara. You were doing what you were supposed to do. You had no reason to believe that this doctor that was going to come on was going to be some sort of, like, cold-hearted assassin. Cut yourself a break, friend.
Stopping the Reapers is the only thing we should be focused on. It's not your fault.
But what if we're wrong? What if there's no way to stop them?
That's also not your
What
fault.
if these are our last days and we spend them scurrying around trying to solve a problem we can't fix?
Come on, Liara.
I know. I shouldn't think that way. I don't know how you do it. You've always stayed focused even in the worst situations.
Okay, so, Liara, there's a reason why that's the case. We're both anxious. I'm scared. I just saw 6 Reapers land in Vancouver. I'm scared too, Liara. We're all anxious. We have a choice of what we're going to do here. Do we focus on the mission and what we're doing right now and getting this data? Or do we channel that anxious energy into what ifs? The difference between you and me right now in this situation, Liara, is you're going into what if land. You're asking questions that we don't necessarily have the answer to, and even if you do have the answer to it right now, it doesn't matter, right? Like, there's no possible way for us to know. You are shifting your focus a little too far in the future. Why don't we cross that bridge when we get to it? We literally have to get to that lab to get the data to know whether it's going to be useful to us. And so we're going to focus on the here and now. We're going to focus on the present. We're going to use our anxiety to create a sequence of behaviors that's going to take us in a direction we want to go. If we spend too much time with what if questions, it's going to immobilize us in a way that's not particularly useful. The way that we stay focused in the here and now is to decide what we do with our anxious energy rather than let it control us. And so that's what I'm doing, is I am channeling it into shooting Cerberus and pushing forward. I got a lot to live for.
Kaidan needs medical attention. We have to leave the Sol system.
I know.
The Citadel is our best chance. We can find help there.
Get us to the Citadel, Joker.
Roger that.
Liara did something really cool. Shepard is sort of lost in that moment. He's lost in his thoughts, his emotion. He's thinking about Kaidan. He's wondering if he's okay. My guess is that Shepard's blaming himself a little bit for what's going on. Who knows how present he is in that moment? Liara takes control in that moment, leans down, and makes eye contact with Shepard and says very simply what needs to happen. You want to ground a person who's kind of lost in their emotions? One of the most powerful ways you can do that is with eye contact. It pulls people into the present. There's a very evolutionary pull for us with eye contact. There's intimacy and presence there, to the point that sometimes people see it as aggression, but it's intimate. She sort of snaps Shepard back into the moment by doing that. And it's so small, but it's so powerful that she does that in that moment, given what she said to us on Mars. And I love that she keeps it simple, she keeps it directive, and she makes eye contact so that Shepard can re-engage and be present with what's going on. It's just super cool that she does that.
You worked in Alliance R&D?
Yes. You'd think quantum entanglement would make communication easy, but imagine incorporating multiple incoming sources and then networking them with extrapolations of time-lag data to construct a coherent situation GUI. It's an exciting challenge. For me, anyway.
Hey, own it. Be excited. Chat, be excited about your passions. Be excited about the things you're good at. Be excited about the things that challenge you and your ability to confront those challenges. I love that she is that excited about those things. Don't ever discount the things you're interested in because you're worried that the person you're talking to is not interested in it. I guarantee you, if you walk into conversations like this and you show that enthusiasm, people will be drawn toward it.
Do you ever regret working for Cerberus?
We didn't work for them. We used them. If I were to feel anything, it would be guilt. We took their money, took their best people, took their best ship. We used them to defeat the Collectors, and now we are using their resources against them. So no, I don't regret it one bit.
That is the picture of a reframe right there. You want to talk about the power of a reframe? That's it right there. Look at her attitude as the result of the way that she chooses to conceptualize our time with Cerberus. People think that reframing is cliche and that it's this hokey thing. It makes a huge difference. The way that you cognitively conceptualize your world, the way that you make sense out of things, absolutely biases your attitude and the behaviors and the way that you interact with people about the things that are going on. So be intentional about the way you think about things and how you frame your world. It makes a huge, huge difference. And Chakwas that's a beautiful example of it.
I noticed generals saluting you, Garrus. How far down the line of succession are you these days?
Let's not go there.
Primarch Vicarian, honored war hero. Somebody's gonna have to rebuild Palaven when this is over.
Yeah, somebody who knows how to hold a hammer.
And there is Shepard eating off of Garrus's confidence. I love this conversation because if you avoid the doubt, if you take the conversation for what it is, you take ownership of your own experience of doubt, you allow Garrus to have ownership of the confidence, we feed off of it a little bit. And next thing you know, we're making a little bit of a joke about how we're going to rebuild Palaven when this thing is over. And it starts to buoy us up a little bit here. It's okay to draw upon the energy of people around you, which is why it's so deeply important to surround yourself with people who have, in general, good energy. If you surround yourself with people who are vampires in terms of emotion and are constantly downers and pessimistic, it's going to pull you down. You cannot help but draw upon that energy. So Shepard surrounding himself with this crew and really allowing them to be the way that they are is a huge boon for this. And you get to see it there with how Shepard responds. I love it.
I'm just willing to do whatever the fuck it takes to end this goddamn war.
Maybe you are. But if you're half as good as I think you are, we need you alive.
Thanks for the pep talk.
Anytime.
Hey, thanks for the dance, Loco.
So I love this because I think it speaks to the fact that James maybe has a little bit of a hard time accessing vulnerability when he's got cognitive blockers. And I think he recognizes that there's maybe a bit of a connection to be had with Shepard. And so by preoccupying himself, by sparring with me, I think it allows him to access the vulnerability a little bit. Gets his body moving, a little bit more of a kinetic exercise. As a result, he's maybe able to access some of these things and talk about it more directly with me in a way that doesn't seem to be as intense, because he's not just standing there looking me in the eye, getting all wrapped up in all of his barriers and judgments and all these things. Instead, he just tells me the facts. He tells me like it is, and I'm able to access him on a little bit more of a personal level as a result of doing that. I really think it's a big camaraderie building thing, and it also allows us to access James in a way that we might not otherwise be able to do.
You mentioned you still had family on Palaven.
My father is there. Sister, too.
How long has it been since you heard from them?
Long enough to be worried.
I'm not going to tell him don't worry. I despise don't worry as a response to people saying that they're worried. I understand that worrying can be annoying, especially when worrying goes to a point where it detracts from a person's autonomy. Anytime a person says I'm worried about it, if you immediately say, don't worry, you're giving them a directive against something that absolutely makes sense to them. It makes sense why Garrus is worried. What it comes down to is, what does he do with that worry? Right? Does he direct it to a lost sense of agency and control, or does he direct it into doing something about it? And doing something about it that is in the spirit of health of him and the people around him.
Couldn't have been more than 6 or 7. I watched him die as the Normandy escaped the attack. Somehow I'm still alive. And he's not.
Being right about the Reapers has never felt much like a victory, has it?
We both knew this fight would be tough. Damned if the Reapers haven't delivered.
At least my government listened to me. Or pretended to.
I want to draw attention really quick to the thing that Shepard said about the kid on Earth, because it's an perfect illustration of something that you may have heard of before, which is called survivor's guilt. Survivor's guilt tends to happen when people create a narrative that they should not have survived a thing that other people didn't. Why me? Why am I the one that gets to live when others died or others were injured? And survivor's guilt tends to come from a deep sense of empathy. It comes from empathy for those who either maybe lost their lives or were harmed by a thing that you weren't harmed for. It's a narrative that gets spun in a direction that's not particularly useful to a person because it starts to beat themselves up for surviving. You can sort of get a window into a person's sense of self-worth in these conversations sometimes with survivor's guilt, because people either believe they didn't deserve to survive, or they think it's unfair. One of the things that you have to be very careful about with survivor's guilt is that it can actually take away from remembering the people who were actually harmed by a thing that happened. It's okay to have some anxiety about the fact that you survived a thing that others didn't, but if you start to overly indulge that guilt narrative, people may start to get frustrated with you because they're going to look at you and say, yeah, but you survived when others did not. And am I supposed to feel bad for you? We can acknowledge the emotion of that, but it's also very important to realize that guilt narratives get created in shoulds. Other people should have lived instead of me, or I should not have survived that, is really going to be a narrative that can be more destructive than helpful down the line.
I know it looks bad now, but I think we can win this, Shepard. For the first time since we met, we're not alone in the fight. It's something I learned long ago in CSEC. An imminent and painful death has a way of motivating people. Instead of questioning your every word, whole civilizations are going to be begging you to save them.
One of the things I like about the way that BioWare created Mass Effect 3, I think more so than 1 or 2, is I really think they give the player a chance to truly empathize with Shepard's emerging doubt. And so Garrus comes into this very confident. And there's this concept sometimes that we call splitting, which is where if we take confidence and we look at confidence as good versus bad, Garrus is exuding confidence in this conversation, saying we've got it, which puts Shepard in a position where he potentially sees himself as the antithesis to confidence, as doubtful. And if Shepard sees that confidence is good, doubt is bad, he is going to try to offload some of that doubt to Garrus by questioning his confidence as a chance to try to equalize that and maybe bring some of his own confidence back up. So Shepard asking here, no doubts, serves two purposes. One is it shows an expression that Shepard is doubtful, but it also potentially tries to inject some doubt in Garrus because we perceive his confidence as missing the mark. It's very complex stuff. Like when we get into splitting and stuff, we start getting into object relations and these very deep psychodynamic models. But I find that dialogue option to be quite interesting, and I think it really hits the mark with BioWare to present it to us. I am actually not going to ask it. I don't really have any interest in shattering Garrus's confidence right now, even if it is bravado. I'm totally okay with the fact that he experiences confidence. I'm going to use it as a little bit of reassurance. Again, one of the hallmarks of Mass Effect 3 is that you start to see the crew attempting to reassure Shepard instead of Shepard being the one that is constantly behind everybody else.
I mean, what's the point of moving on with your life when everything is going to hell?
Start thinking that way and we've already lost.
Yeah, you're right, but... well, to be honest, I've never felt as alone as I do right now.
Completely understandable. You know what a person's attachment figure is by who they seek proximity to in times of distress, whether they're a child or an adult. Cortez and all of us are going through immense galactic trauma and stress. Cortez obviously still has his husband internalized as his attachment figure, which would certainly make sense, and he is not able to seek physical proximity to him because he's dead, which is going to cause even more attachment injury because now I'm in distress, and the person that I want to seek proximity to that brings me some consistency, some reliability of emotional support, of closeness, is not available to me. Having to confront that, given the context we're currently in, of course he feels alone. That's going to bring that even more to the surface. What makes death so difficult sometimes for people, particularly if they experience adversity while going through the grief process. Also, sometimes after that person has started to kind of not move on, but has moved into a space where it's not as salient to be thinking about that attachment figure, or maybe they find somebody else or some friends that they transfer it to. Again, we might experience some of that distress of like the first time you realize that you're leaning on somebody else as opposed to the person that you might have otherwise been leaning on if they were still alive. It's what makes grief such a complicated process.
Oh, Commander. Yes, I'm sorry. Just... this is hard.
Of course. Are you all right?
Yes. No. I don't know. My father and I didn't leave things in a great state.
An argument?
Yes. It was trivial. A disagreement on how to file some of the specimens. I was mad about something else. I don't remember what. I took it out on him. So stupid.
I bet a lot of people in chat potentially are watching this could relate to this. It is very difficult when you lose a loved one suddenly and your last interaction with that loved one was less than ideal. It leads to oftentimes a lot of over-personalization. You fixate on that final interaction, and people tend to see life as going on after death. People sometimes will struggle with that because they'll say like, that's the energy I sent that person off with. They died with that being the last interaction they had with me. And while that makes sense to go into it with that mentality to some extent, you gotta be careful not to over-personalize that and make that the de facto memory you have of that person, because you do yourself and that person a disservice to think that that one thing that at the time existed completely in perfect context, and 100 times out of 100, if you went back to that moment without hindsight, you would do the same thing. What it really comes down to is the anxiety and the sadness and the devastation of it happening suddenly, and people overly latch on to the final thing they had control over and the final moments they had with that person, and it can do you a disservice because it takes you away from the breadth of the memory you can have with that person.
There's also a big expose on quasar tournaments, tips on how to make your apartment look bigger, and, oh yeah, a big-ass Reaper invasion. These people have no idea.
Oh no, they know. They know, Joker. But when people know that a ridiculously bad thing is happening that they have no control over, they tend to turtle shell and pay attention to the things that they can control, and a lot of the times that is focusing on the ways in which you can escape from the reality of what's going on. They know they're scared, and they're trying to do whatever they can to maintain their sanity against the threat that they literally have no control over dealing with. Stick your head in the sand. That's what people do sometimes. By the way, that question kind of sucks. Shepard asks it a lot. The question, are you all right, is not great. When you can tell that a person is obviously distressed, it puts pressure on a person to basically say yes or no and speak in absolutes. And that's not particularly helpful to a given situation. Like, if you could obviously tell that a person is distressed, just acknowledge it. Right? Like, hey, what's going on? How are you doing? Stuff like that is better than, are you all right? Especially when the answer is so obviously no.
What do you need from me?
I appreciate the offer, Shepard, but you have your hands full. If I need a door or two kicked down, I know just who to call. But for now, I'll be fine.
Is anybody else here a little bit annoyed? Miranda, it is not your job to police my boundary. But she's doing the whole like, I gotta figure this out. But I don't know. Things are dark. I'm just happening to tell somebody who I know gets things done and who I have a past with. If I need a door kicked in, I'll call you. But I'm gonna be really cryptic in the meantime. Chat, please, for the love of God, if you have a thing that you directly need to say to somebody and you're afraid to say it, please don't focus on that fear as being a thing that blocks you from saying the thing that you need to say. If you need help, if you've got something that you need, own it, say it, make the request, allow me to police my own boundaries. If you bring something up cryptically, hoping that somebody's going to pursue it and ask you more, you're making people chase after something. If you know specifically what you're trying to get a person to go pay attention to, just bring that closer to the person. Don't make them chase after it.
I'd like to, Shepard. I'd like to move past the harsh words and be friends. At least.
So how do we fix it?
I'll admit, I own a lot of that. And you were standing right in front of me and I shut you down. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay, so let's just put it behind us and get on with what's important right now.
Bury it?
Bury it. Forgive it. I think that's how we get past Horizon.
I kind of wish Shepard would take a little bit of ownership here too. I think that's really cool that Kaidan could acknowledge that. I kind of wish Shepard would say, hey man, I'm sorry too. I showed up back from the dead, working for an organization that for as long as we've known each other, we've hated. And despite the fact that I attempted, I also got defensive on Horizon. I didn't give myself a chance to say to you, I understand this looks bad. We were in dire straits. We were fighting collectors, and I didn't stop for a second to think about what that must have been like for you to see me that way. And because I wasn't able to empathize with you, because I didn't own up to it, it made you defensive too. So we were both defensive there. Neither one of us really contributed to that being an effective conversation. So I'm sorry too for the role that I had. I wish Shepard would say that, because I love that Kaidan was willing to own that.
I never had a family. And these guys, anyone screws with my students, I will tear them apart.
You love to see this. You love to see this. Jack has found purpose. You want to talk about like how you can figure out ways to overcome some of your trauma and find purpose and like meaning and relationship and connection? Here we go. Jack gets to be adored. She gets to use the amazing power she has for good instead of being forced to use it for evil. This allows her to basically take everything she was raised with and everything that she had and channel it into something that she can be proud of and is meaningful for her. And I think that's badass. She had to do a lot of soul searching for that. That's what we talk about when we talk about how you make choices in your adulthood with the cards that you were given as a child. You don't have to be a slave to trauma. It's unfortunate that it happens. It's not your fault that it happens. And the unfortunate aspect of trauma is that you are tasked with having to learn to manage it and navigate it. It's the unfair proposition of trauma. Jack has now decided that she's not going to let that dictate her. She's going to decide what she does with it and take control of it in a way that's meaningful. In the same way, when we were in the room with her back on the station we blew up, we gave her control of that moment.
Years ago, our operatives sabotaged the Shroud facility to ensure what you were planning couldn't be done. Morden will likely detect this malfunction and repair it. But if you ensure that he doesn't, then the cure's viability will be altered just enough so that it fails. No one will notice the change.
You mean trick the Krogan?
They need not be any the wiser. Let Urdnot Wrex believe you fulfilled your promise.
Morden would never stand for that.
How you deal with him is up to you, Commander. We can provide you our very best scientists to build the Crucible, and the full support of our fleets.
If I sabotage the cure.
Think about it, Commander. The choice is yours.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Like, I'm gonna take the Solarian army over a Krogan army? Are you kidding? Oh my god. She has no power, and you can tell that she knows it. She has absolutely no leverage here. The only thing that Solarians have is cunning, and she thinks that she's being cunning here. The thing that I want to mostly point out here, and I think what really annoys me the most about the Dalatras, and probably annoys many of you, is that the Dalatras is trying to control the future by saying what will happen, not what could happen. We don't know that that's what's going to happen, and honestly, what we do know is that if we don't get this figured out, the Reapers are going to wipe us out, and it's not going to matter. That's the thing that we do know. We have a Reaper threat. There are a lot of people, including the Dalatras, that will forego actual present threats that we actually have control to influence and work with off of a perceived or created or curated truth in the form of what will happen in the future based on past evidence in completely different context. If you're a person that does that, you really want to look at yourself and the fact that you do that, because if that yanks you out of the present, it ends up causing a whole bunch of issues because you're not actually taking control of what you can control in the moment, and you're creating a story that you're possibly going to will into existence. The Dalatras is literally willing this into existence by her saying, oh, well, do this, sabotage this, nobody will know. We don't know that nobody's gonna know. And if somebody finds out, not only does that put humans in jeopardy, it puts Solarians in jeopardy. It's gonna piss off the Turians, and then the Krogan are gonna come after everybody again, and then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The Dalatras here is just so misguided. It's really unbelievable to me that she uses as much of the past to try to predict the future as she does.
It's open.
Shepard, there's something you need to hear.
All right.
Is this a bad time?
You can be a incredibly resilient person. Resilience, in fact, is one of the things that we know buffers a person's capacity to experience something as traumatic and still experience trauma. Shepard has experienced a lot of trauma. Granted, we've made it through stuff. We've survived things. We are still alive. It doesn't mean that the losses that we've accrued, that the things we've seen don't affect Shepard, even if just subconsciously. So these dreams, and one of the things that we see, I'm hesitant to call what Shepard has PTSD. I'd have to do a full assessment on that. But like when people experience trauma and the trauma starts to affect them, dreams can become one of the ways in which people process that trauma and can sometimes re-experience that trauma and subconsciously sort of are like working it out. And I think that's what these dreams represent for Shepard. You'll see a lot of times when people have experienced a traumatic event, series of traumatic events, if they really do fit the criteria for PTSD, that they will often talk about nightmares, and often very lucid. So Shepard's experienced a lot of stuff. Shepard's not immune to trauma. None of us are immune to trauma. We might think that we're strong, but trauma, the thing to remember about trauma is that it's a gross violation of expectations coupled with a lost sense of safety and security. Even though we might have a high threshold for expectations of our ability to survive, we've still seen some shit that violates that expectation. We've been in unsafe situations. We've seen people die. We've witnessed that stuff. And Shepard has experienced it too.
Being a soldier's the only thing I've ever been really good at. And not because I try. Hell, I'd have kicked my ass out years ago. Last time I had a command, I lost almost everyone. And they promoted me for it. I guess I'm just not sure if I'm ready to lead again. I don't know if I want that responsibility.
Which is totally fair. I actually really respect people who question whether they want to be in position of leadership. If he's not mentally in that space of like, I'm going to do this and I want to take this on, there's a good chance that like he's not going to be a great leader, because if he gets into a space where he's questioning his present decisions because of decisions he's made in the past that he can't quite seem to get away from because they're maybe a little bit too intrusive or he hasn't fully worked through them and processed them, then yeah, he's probably not in the best space to be in a leadership position, and that's okay for him to admit that. It's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of self-reflection.
I love this part of the Presidium. It reminds me of where I grew up.
Where's that?
Armali, back on Thessia. My mother and I lived beside a park. I spent hours there.
Doing what?
Reading, exploring, getting in trouble digging for ruins in the grass.
You're kidding.
I was very young.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing kids do. Like, when people say that kids do dumb things, that puts adult sensibilities on what children do. Kids do things that are developmentally appropriate and more often than not make sense. This is me being a little bit of an annoying, development person, but, really that's what it comes down to here. It's not about kids being dumb. It's about them exploring their world. They have no pretext for understanding the things that are going on. They're learning. They're engaging with the environment. They're learning what things' boundaries are, what they do, what they feel like, what they are, what they smell like. They use their imaginations. It's all normal. It's part of development. So when people say things like kids do dumb things, yeah, it's dumb if they're adults, perhaps. But if you get too far into that, you start treating kids like they're dumb, and that's a weird thing to do.
Oh, the echo shot. Passed from soldier to soldier, Prothean to Prothean. Each adds their memories to it.
Like a beacon. How far back does it go?
To a time before the Reapers. It is all that is left of my people.
And you don't want to remember that?
Imagine if everyone you knew was dead. You could not remember their faces or the color of the sky above your home. The memories were gone, but so was the pain. Would you want to remember that, Commander? Even if it meant watching everyone die again?
And that, my friends, is why memory suppression is part of trauma coping. whether voluntary or not. Because indeed, if something very traumatic happens to a person, it can actually be very functional for the brain to shut your memory off so that you don't either pay attention in the moment or so that you don't remember it in the aftermath, because memories can be so lucid and vivid that it can at times feel like we're reliving something even if we experience them as memories, right? So people like to suppress the brain itself will shut it off to protect you, which is why when people think that trauma therapy means going and uncovering repressed memories, no, not always. In fact, that can actually be more damaging. We don't just go there. And if you do go there, you go there very delicately and you get somebody in a position where they are ready for it as best they can be.